it theoretically held to celebrate 100 years of Chicago as a city. But because it was the 1930s, that was also the Great Depression. And it helped to boost jobs and generate morale at a time when not a lot of people had jobs, not a lot of people had a way to make money or to have fun. So we had this big World's Fair to help fix that here in Chicago. And it had such a positive impact. We've immortalized it to this day on our flag. Now, occasionally there's talk of adding a fifth star for this mayor or for that historical event, but I bet you they're just waiting until the Cubs win the World Series, and we'll see that fifth star pop up. They might be waiting for a little while, though. Now, if we look off our left-hand side as we head on the river, if we look behind this sort of stripy building, you can see a building peeking up over the top of it with wavy balconies. That wavy balcony building back there is called Aqua, and it's the tallest building in the world, designed by a female-headed architecture firm. The architect in this question is balconies are the same size or shape. They range from 1 foot in depth to over 12 feet deep, and each one of them is unique. And that uniqueness to them, of course, it's very beautiful, but it's also functional. Terraces lines up with another building on the skyline. The lowest terrace of the Kirk Tower lines up with the Cornice height on the Wrigley building. The Cornice height is that lowest ceiling. The Wrigley building is that white building with the clock tower on top. That is one of the first skyscrapers built on the north side of the Chicago River. It was built in 1921, and prior to the 1920s, most of our business district was south of the Chicago River in the area that's known as the Loop, because the elevated trains make a big loop there. Now, once the Michigan Avenue Bridge was opened up, well, this formerly residential area became a retail corridor. And the Wrigley building is sort of one of the first buildings to go in there. Now, Wrigley today, we know that for chewing gum. But William Wrigley got his start selling baking soda and soap powder. The chewing gum began its name in the cream because he wasn't especially good, unfortunately, at selling baking soda and soap. Family friend of his gave him a recipe for chewing gum. He started including a free stick of gum with every purchase of soap. All of a sudden, sales went through the roof. He realized people were buying extra soap just to get more gum. So he switched his focus over to chewing gum, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now, coming up on our left-hand side here is a boxy tan building with big fancy towers on the corners and a dome that's partly covered in scaffolding. That's the Jewelers Building for Chicago, built around 1926. As you may have guessed from the name, it was built to be offices for Chicago's jewel merchants. Well, the 1920s are the gangster years here in Chicago. We had lots of mobsters here. And the jewelers were afraid to move their jewels on the street because they were afraid they'd be stolen. And so there was an extra security feature inside the jewelers building at first. There was a car elevator so the jewelers could drive their cars full of jewels. The thing about that is there was a wolf in the sheepfold. That dome at the top of the building used to be one of the highest points in the city, making it a great place to have a speakeasy, an illegal nightclub, which was a favorite hangout of one of Chicago's most famous gangsters ever, Mr. Al Capone himself, who was the only other person to have permission to use that car elevator in case he needed to miss today. All of the bridges we go underneath, they all open and close. Chicago has the second most movable bridges of any of the cities in the world, second most after Amsterdam. Now, these are very beautiful, of course. They're also not able to be opened on demand, otherwise we'd have big crowd that they'll fit underneath. But at the beginning and ending of the boating season, they actually especially Wacker Drive. Now, if you're not from Chicago, I recommend avoiding Wacker Drive if at all possible, because it's very confusing. There's a North Wacker Drive, an East Wacker Drive, a West Wacker Drive, a South Wacker Drive, an Upper and Lower Wacker Drive, a Wacker Place, and where we tie up the boat, there's even a mouthful. Wacker Drive is actually part of a gentleman named Daniel Burnham's 1909 plan to help alleviate traffic congestion in Chicago. So the upper level is intended for pedestrians, commuters, tourists, and the like. Car chases and crashes in that Never Dark Night, as well as the movie The Blues Brothers. There's a car chase and crash over there as well. We'll get back to the buildings in just 1 second after we pass underneath the Wells Street Bridge here. If we look up at a building, it says 220 Patterson Fox, who specialize in what's called contextual style architecture, buildings inspired by their surroundings. And if we look up at the top of 225 West Blacker Drive, we can see this building is inspired by the bridges. We've got two towers up there connected by a little bitty bridge up there. That's pretty nifty. Now, Cone Patterson Fox also designed the next building on our left-hand side. This curving green glass building is the new Reed building. Sits at 333 West Wacker Drive. This building was inspired by the Chicago River itself. The curve of the building was specially selected to match the color of Chicago's river water. We think of ourselves as having a green river here in Chicago rather than a blue one or a brown one, especially during St. Patrick's Day weekend when we put a little bit of extra eco-friendly green dye in the river to be festive. Now you'll notice the bottom of the Nuveen building is covered over with stone. Well, you see that train going by the building? That's our elevated train. Here in Chicago, we don't have a subway for the most part because there's too much water downtown. We constantly be pumping water out of the tunnels. So instead we put our trains up in the air. We call them the elevated train, or the L for short. Now these trains can be awfully noisy. You don't want an office next to that going by multiple times an hour throughout the day. You have a migraine before you're even finished with your first day at work. And Cone Patterson Fox City's first hotel stood on this spot. It was called the Sauganash Hotel. They had a convention center called the Wigwam, and it was there in 1860 that a railroad lawyer by the name of Abraham Lincoln was nominated to run for president of the United States. Illinois' license plates are very proudly proclaim Illinois is the land of Lincoln. Next bridge actually is this tall building, looks kind of like a tan armchair. That is the Civic Opera Building. It was started in 1928 by the architecture firm Grant Anderson Probst and White. Now, as we go by the Civic Opera Building, take a look at the stonework on the side facing the river. You're going to see comedy and tragedy masks. If you look carefully, you can see horns and harps, laurel wreaths and swords, singers and torches. At first, I thought it was just comedy and tragedy masks, but every time I look at it, I swear I see something different, letting you know that this building is a palace of the arts. In the back, the money man for Thomas Edison. Samuel Insull was married to an opera singer who was very popular here in Chicago. She went off to New York City to try and make a name for herself there, but they didn't like her singing in New York. In fact, they booed her off the stage. She came back to Chicago in tears. Samuel, they hated me in New York. I'll never be a real opera singer, never. Well, like a good husband, he said, don't worry, honey. We're going to build you an opera house right here in Chicago. They love you here in Chicago. You can perform to your heart's content. And it's going to turn its back on New York, face west towards the future. So it looks like a giant armchair. Its back is this building off our left-hand side right now, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange Center. You'll notice it's so big. It stretches all the way from the Madison Street Bridge to the edge of the Madison Street Bridge behind us to the edge of the Monroe Street Bridge in front of us. That's why it's got these sort of sawtooth corners to it, because those bridge towers for the buildings that have been executive in this one, you've got a leg up on your chances for getting a corner office because you've got 4 times as many as usual. As you saw, you still have your cameras out. If you don't, this is a good time to get them back down and turn them on. You've got your cell phone set it to camera mode because we are going to be turning around in just a second between those 2 white buildings ahead of us on our left-hand side. And when we do, that will be the closest approach we can possibly make to the tallest building in the city. We've seen it once already from the lake. We're going to get up close and personal with it in just a minute, and that is the Sears/Willis Tower. Now, I keep saying Sears/Willis because some folks do know it as the Willis Tower. It was renamed Willis in 2009, but if you're from Chicago, it'll always be Sears, so I've kind of got to keep both of those names in rotation. Now, the Sears Tower very, very shortly now. Going to be coming up here in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and there it is, 1,454 feet of skyscraper. That's not including those antennas on the top, by the way. It's a full 110 stories tall. On the 130 story, as you look up, make sure you smile and wave. Because up there is a sky deck called the Ledge. And not only are the windows see-through there, so is the ceiling and so is the floor. Up there, yep, I saw a camera flash. People are looking down between their feet at us over 1,000 feet below them here on the river. We look like ants to them. Now on a beautiful clear day, you can see 4 different states from the top of the Sears Tower up there. You can see Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin right up until the middle of last summer. What happened in the middle of the water's edge? What's going on here is that we are widening Chicago's Riverwalk. Back when we timed the boat, did you see how nice it was? You could walk under the bridges, there were riverfront cafes, benches, trees. Well, the Riverwalk here was a little more than a sidewalk at first. You had to walk down the stairs. You could only go for a block. Then you had to walk back up the stairs, cross the street, go back down the stairs. It was a big hassle. Nobody was doing that. And so we've got a grant from the federal government to widen the Riverwalk, make it more handicap accessible, include more parks. And if you look underneath the bridges, you can see some metal cylinders sticking up. Those are going to hold up a sidewalk to make it more handicap accessible. So you can actually take a ramp down and go underneath the bridges at one level. Now if you look behind all this construction, you can see some cinder block walls and archways. Railroad stations right downtown. There's Union Station, which is Amtrak's hub in the Midwest. There's also Ogilvie Transit Center, which is for our Metra commuter trains. Now, Metra commuter trains are those trains that go in Amtrak train. And it's a beautiful trip if you can. I work on a boat. I tend to be a little bit more in favor of sort of human scale travel rather than a jet plane. You hop in a little tube and you hop out there on the other side of the country. It's not natural. I much prefer trains and boats, personally. Now, one of the first buildings to go in over the train tracks was 2 North Riverside Plaza, the sandstone-colored building with the clock towers over the end. Look at the building beyond 2 North Riverside Plaza. You can see a glowing purple clock on top of it. That's the Boeing building. That purple clock, by the way, is the world's tallest 2-phase clock tower. Now, if we look at the short part of the Boeing building, we can see some white I-beams forming triangles and X-shapes on it. That looks decorative, but it's actually a structural truss. See, most of the Boeing building is held up on columns, like the rest of the building you've seen over the train tracks. But underneath one corner of the building, which is Texas, in the early 1990s, you saw they had this beautiful river walk in there. People will have picnics there, walk their dogs, bring their dates. You get back to Chicago, we saw we have this beautiful river. Why don't we have a river walk? Passed legislation that now is going to incorporate the riverfront into our city for a very dramatic event. I'm so glad that we're running just a little bit behind schedule. All this building here, the Sears Tower of 1930, because it was the largest building in the world when it was built. As the first building to be so very big that it needs its own zip code. There's one postal code just for merchandise, Mark. You can run an entire 5K inside without crossing your path even once, because there's over 4 miles of hallway. Now, today it's full of offices for tech companies. You can still see the heads of major merchants from the late 20s and early 30s with their heads sculpted on posts out front. You can go by and see the face of Montgomery Ward, Marshall Field, Edward Filene, Beetley Woolworth, and many others. Now, when David Letterman visited the city, he called this the Pez Dispenser Hall of Fame. They look kind of like giant Pez dispensers. The city is now leading the country in the number of environmentally friendly buildings it has. These are called LEED certified buildings. It stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. The ranking scale from silver, gold to platinum. This one here is a platinum certified building, the one off our left-hand side with the yellow concrete gates and the glass going up. Now, they've done lots of work to make it environmentally friendly. One of the newest back to the environment, they actually take Chicago's river water and use it to cool the air, send it back filtered, cleaner than it ever was before. Now, coming up here on our right-hand side, you can see a big, tall building. It's got kind of notched out corners, and it's got these pointy roofs to it. This big, tall building with the columns, and classical referencing Greek and Roman architecture. So the archways and pediments over the bottom. And the upper portion of this building has been nicknamed the Parthenon on a stick. And now we go back to the left-hand side of the boat, 4 Marina City Towers. Now that's these 2, well, it looks like there's one right now. We'll see the second one in a second. These 2 round towers plus everything underneath. It's all called Marina City. Up top are all those those balconies are then iconic spiral parking garages, and underneath that, when the building first opened, there was a movie theater and a bowling alley, in addition to the restaurants and boat slips we see here today. Now, if you're interested in music, you might want to remember where these towers are, because behind them is the Chicago House of Blues. Now, Bertrand Goldberg envisioned these towers as being trees or flowers, but here in Chicago, we trade grain futures. We're also, you know, we're in the Midwest. We call these the corn cob towers. And now, so to the right-hand side again. We can see a building that's lit up at the top, it's green at the bottom, tapering neck, and the top is shiny yellow with 24-karat gold leaf up there. That big green building behind the one that says Morton's on it, that's the carbon and carbide building. It was built in 1928, designed for gangster years here in Chicago. One of the things the gangsters were very good at was selling illegal bootleg liquor. And that building is built kind of as a punchline on the fact that liquor was flowing more freely during Prohibition than it had when it was legal. The building is wide at the base with a tapering neck and a top wrapped in gold foil, just like a bottle of champagne. Give you whiplash just a little bit. Back to the left-hand side, beyond the Wrigley building, we can see a building that looks kind of like an Art Deco building. It's got those panels under the windows, but it's got a cathedral stuck on top of it with an American flag. That's Tribune Tower over there. It was designed by Howells and Hood, the architects, who won a competition to design the world's greatest skyscraper for the world's greatest newspaper. That's what the Tribune very humbly calls itself. Now, this competition drew architects to submit buildings from designs. Architects all over the world, hundreds of architects submitted designs for this building. But what Howells and Hood knew that nobody else knew was that Colonel McCormick, the owner of the Chicago Tribune, he loved old Gothic architecture. He had been stationed in France during World War I, and he fell in love with all the cathedrals they had out there. And so they kind of played it up to his preferences, put Gothic flourishes at the bottom and top of the building. Whereas the other firms who were submitting designs, they were trying to design the streamlined, fancy building of the future. Howells and Hood, though, they catered to the big boss, made the building of ages long past, and they won GN News and Radio. You can walk by and actually see them recording the radio show at the bottom. Also embedded in front of the Tribune Tower are pieces of historic structures from all over the world, including the Taj Mahal, the Berlin Wall, Great Wall of China, Notre Dame Cathedral, and many others. Howells and Hood carries through today in the name of a brew pub at the bottom of Tribune Tower, also called Howells and Hood. I used to tell folks that they had over 20 different beers on tap, thinking that would be a great place to go after the ride for a drink. Well, I was wrong. They actually have over 100 different beers on tap there. They don't even do bottle service. Bottles like mine. Well, we've got to make a loop-de-loop somewhere, get turned around so we can let you all off. We are almost at the end of our tour. If you do have any further questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the top of the gangplank.